December 7, 1941. A quiet Sunday morning in Hawaii. Within 2 hours, the world would never be the same. Japan launched what seemed like a perfect military strike, but this victory would become their greatest strategic mistake. How did a single morning seal the fate of an entire empire? To understand this, we need to go back to the 1930s. Japan had big ambitions. They wanted an empire like Britain's, like America's. Resources to exploit, territories to control, power to command. But there was one massive problem. Japan had almost nothing. No oil, no iron, no coal. Everything an empire needs they had to import, and that made them vulnerable. In 1931, Japan took its first major step, invading Manchuria in northern China. Coal, iron, strategic position, all within reach. By 1937, full-scale war erupted across China. At first, Japan won victory after victory, but the conflict dragged on. It became a stalemate, a drain on resources, a war with no end in sight. Japan needed more, much more. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, America was watching. After World War I, the US had retreated into isolationism. No foreign wars, no entanglements, stay out of Europe's problems. But as the 1930s wore on, as Japan committed atrocities in China, and Nazi Germany rose in Europe, American public opinion began to shift. By 1939, the US started supplying Britain and France with weapons. By 1941, the Lend-Lease program was sending massive aid to China, Britain, and the Soviet Union. America wasn't officially at war, but everyone knew whose side they were on. For Japan, this was a crisis. In 1939, 80% of Japan's oil came from the United States. Without American oil, their military machine would grind to a halt. Their conquest of China would collapse. Their imperial dreams would die. Japan had two options for securing the resources they desperately needed: north or south. The northern strategy meant attacking Soviet Siberia, rich in coal and oil. The southern strategy meant striking into British Malaya and the Dutch East Indies, territories overflowing with oil and rubber. At first, the northern plan seemed promising, but in 1939, at the Battle of Kholkhin Gol, Soviet forces crushed the Japanese army. Suddenly, invading Siberia looked far more dangerous. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, Japan briefly reconsidered attacking from the east, but they were already bogged down in China, bleeding resources, losing momentum. The southern strategy became the only real choice. In September 1940, Japan moved into northern French Indochina, cutting off a key Chinese supply route. America responded with an embargo on iron, steel, and copper. Japan didn't stop. In July 1941, they occupied even more of Indochina, positioning themselves for attacks further south. This time, America hit back hard. The US froze all Japanese assets in America, effectively cutting off oil purchases. Britain and the Netherlands, which controlled the Dutch East Indies, followed suit with their own embargoes. In one stroke, Japan lost 94% of its oil supply. Japan was cornered. They tried negotiating. America's demands were simple: withdraw from China, abandon your alliance with Germany and Italy. For Japan, accepting those terms meant total defeat, the end of everything they'd fought for. Unwilling to surrender their ambitions, Japan made a fateful decision. They would seize the oil fields of the Dutch East Indies by force. But there was a problem. The Philippines, a US territory, sat right next to their supply lines, like a dagger pointed at Japan's throat. If America intervened, everything would collapse. Japan concluded they had no choice. They had to neutralize the American Pacific Fleet before launching their southern campaign. That meant attacking Pearl Harbor. Now here's the critical part. Japan knew they couldn't win a long war with America. Their entire strategy hinged on a short conflict. Strike hard, take what they need, dig in defensively, and hope America wouldn't have the stomach for a costly war across thousands of miles of ocean. They believed America would negotiate for peace, allowing Japan to keep some or all of their conquests. It was a massive gamble, and it required perfect execution. On November 26, 1941, a Japanese strike force departed from Japan. 6 aircraft carriers, 2 battleships, and hundreds of aircraft. Their destination, a point 230 miles north of the Hawaiian island of Oahu. Their mission, destroy the US Pacific Fleet, anchored at Pearl Harbor. The attack was scheduled for December 7th. The Americans would have no warning, no chance to prepare. Complete surprise was essential. The Japanese plan had clear objectives. First, sink battleships. This was for psychological impact. Japan believed if Americans saw their mighty battleships destroyed, symbols of naval power reduced to burning wrecks, their will to fight would shatter. Second, immobilize the fleet for 6 months. Japan estimated they needed 6 months to complete their conquests in Southeast Asia. After that, they'd be on the defensive, wearing down American counterattacks, culminating in a decisive naval battle that would force America to the negotiating table. Notice what wasn't in their plan. Attacking fuel tanks or repair facilities at Pearl Harbor was never seriously considered. It was irrelevant to their 6-month goal. This would prove to be a catastrophic oversight. But in November 1941, as the strike force sailed toward Hawaii, Japanese planners were confident. They'd trained for 10 months. Their air crews were among the best in the world. Everything was ready. At Pearl Harbor, approximately 80 ships lay at anchor. 8 battleships lined up in what became known as Battleship Row. 8 cruisers were in port, 4 of them vulnerable to torpedo attack. Dozens of destroyers and auxiliary vessels filled the harbor, but the 3 American aircraft carriers were all at sea that day, out on training exercises. This would have enormous consequences, but the Japanese didn't know it yet. The attack would come in 2 waves. The first wave, 183 aircraft, launched at 6 a.m. on December 7th. 50 level bombers and 40 torpedo bombers, known as Kates, formed the main strike force. Their torpedoes had been specially modified with wooden fins, so they could operate in Pearl Harbor's shallow waters. American naval experts believed torpedo attacks were impossible in such shallow depths. They were wrong. The Japanese had solved the problem. As the strike force approached Oahu, the sky was clear of American fighters. The Japanese had achieved total surprise. At 7:55 a.m., the attack began. Dive bombers hit first, striking Ford Island before the torpedo bombers even launched. Within minutes, chaos erupted across the harbor. Some Japanese pilots, finding their primary targets, the aircraft carriers, absent from port, improvised. Several attacked the old battleship USS Utah, mistaking it for a more valuable target. 2 torpedoes slammed into her hull. She capsized at 8:12. Others hit the cruiser USS Helena and the light cruiser USS Raleigh. But the real devastation was about to unfold at Battleship Row. Due to Pearl Harbor's geography, the torpedo bombers really had only one avenue of approach, flying single file down the southeast channel. They came in one after another, 1,000 feet apart. This meant instead of spreading out their attack, they concentrated disproportionately on the southern tip of Battleship Row. The USS Oklahoma and USS West Virginia took the brunt of the assault. 12 aircraft from the carrier Akagi approached at 7:57. All 12 launched against Oklahoma and West Virginia. 1 skillfully maneuvered and struck the USS California. 4 more planes from the carrier Hiryu joined shortly after, also targeting Oklahoma and West Virginia. Now here's an important point. The Japanese weren't attacking unopposed. The defenders, warned by the bomb blasts at Ford Island, rushed to their anti-aircraft guns. These slow, vulnerable torpedo bombers had to make their runs under increasingly heavy fire. 3 miles behind Akagi's strike came the aircraft from the carrier Kaga. By now, anti-aircraft fire was becoming more effective. Again, Oklahoma and West Virginia took the punishment. 5 of the last 7 attacking Kates were shot down. Let's look at the results. 21 torpedoes were launched at Oklahoma and West Virginia alone, over half the available torpedoes. Oklahoma took 5 hits. She capsized in just 15 minutes, trapping over 400 men inside. West Virginia was hit by 7 torpedoes. Prompt counter-flooding by her crew prevented capsizing, but she settled to the bottom. California was struck by 2 torpedoes. She shouldn't have sunk from just 2 hits, but her watertight hatches were open for inspection that morning. Water flooded in. She was abandoned due to fires, and when her crew returned, it was too late. She slowly sank. Of the 36 torpedoes launched in the first wave, only 19 achieved hits. That's a 53% hit rate. Not as good as expected. The attack that should have taken 90 seconds stretched over 11 minutes. Mutual interference between aircraft, heavy anti-aircraft fire throwing off aim, and confusion led to over-concentration on just 2 battleships. The coordination wasn't perfect, but the damage was catastrophic. 10,000 feet above, high-level bombers came in groups of 5. Their mission: take out the inboard battleships that torpedoes couldn't reach. They scored a 20% hit rate, impressive for high-altitude bombing. But here's where Japanese weaponry failed them. Out of 10 bomb hits, about 6 were duds or low-order detonations, a 60% failure rate. The aviators were let down by their weapons. The damage could have been far worse. But then came the hit that defined the day. 2 bombs struck the USS Arizona. The first hit her aft on the quarterdeck. The second landed near her number 2 turret. It penetrated deep into the ship and detonated in a forward magazine. The explosion was massive. A tremendous fireball erupted into the sky. Arizona split in half and sank in 9 minutes, taking 1,177 sailors with her. The explosion was so powerful it was captured on film by a doctor on the hospital ship, USS Solace. Heavy fires burned for days. The Arizona became a tomb. One battleship, the USS Nevada, managed to get underway at 8:40. She headed for the harbor channel, trying to escape to open water. It was a brave attempt, but it made her a target for the second wave. At 8:54 a.m., the second attack wave arrived. 170 aircraft, including 78 dive bombers allocated to attack warships. Much was expected from these skilled pilots. Their performance was disappointing. By now, anti-aircraft defenses were fully alert and firing at maximum capacity. 70 to 90% cloud cover obscured targets. But the biggest problem was poor target selection. These dive bombers, with their general-purpose bombs, were well suited for attacking the 8 cruisers in Pearl Harbor. Modern valuable targets, closely packed. But during the attack, roughly 30 bombers went after battleships. Only 17 attacked cruisers, 16 went for destroyers, and 12 hit auxiliaries. The priority list was ignored. Nevada, trying to escape, became the focus of attention. 14 to 18 dive bombers attacked her from 2 directions. The prospect of sinking her in the channel and blocking Pearl Harbor entirely was tempting. 5 bombs hit Nevada by 9:00 a.m. At 9:10 she had to beach herself to avoid sinking in the channel. This was the second wave's shining moment, but even this deserves criticism. Did they contribute to sinking a battleship? Yes, but by the rarest luck. Nevada succumbed not primarily to Japanese bombs but to poor material condition, critical design flaws, and a massive damage control mistake. The battleship should have been avoided. The attempt to sink her in the channel was a waste of ordnance that could have been far more effective against cruisers. Some bombers attacked the USS Pennsylvania, the fleet's flagship, in dry dock. 9 bombers targeted her. Only 1 bomb hit, but 2 destroyers ahead of her, the USS Cassine and USS Downs, received heavy collateral damage. The destroyer USS Shaw was inexplicably targeted by as many as 15 bombers. 3 bombs hit her, one unleashing a tremendous fireball that became one of the most iconic images of the attack. Why target a destroyer so heavily? Probably because she was in a floating dry dock and resembled a larger ship. Here's the critical point. Against a 55% accuracy rate achieved during training, the dive bombers got only 15 hits on December 7th. That's a 27% hit rate. Poor performance, and only 1 hit and 1 damaging near miss were achieved on their highest priority targets, the cruisers. The second wave contributed almost nothing substantial to immobilizing the Pacific Fleet. Even worse, they missed golden opportunities. 4 modern cruisers were tied up at the naval yard, packed closely together. The area was clear of smoke, visibility was perfect, and these ships were in vulnerable positions with hatches open and flammable materials scattered throughout. A concentrated attack here would have been devastating, but only about 10 dive bombers even attacked this area, and only 1 damaging near miss was achieved. The Japanese missed a chance to deliver a far more effective blow. By 9:30 the attack was over. The strike force turned back toward their carriers and began the journey home. Behind them Pearl Harbor burned. The human cost was staggering. 2,335 Americans dead, another 1,178 wounded. Civilian casualties totaled 103, including 68 dead. 5 battleships sunk, but only 2 were permanent losses, Arizona and Oklahoma. The other 3 would be raised, repaired, and returned to service before the war's end. 3 battleships at Pearl Harbor suffered light damage. 3 cruisers were damaged. 3 destroyers heavily hit. Over 180 aircraft were destroyed on the ground at airfields across Oahu. The Japanese lost 29 aircraft, 9 in the first wave, 20 in the second, a testament to how quickly American defenders responded. All 5 midget submarines sent to penetrate the harbor were lost. The strike force sailed back to Japan unscathed. On paper it looked like a tremendous victory. But let's ask the critical question. Was the mission accomplished? In the short term, yes. All 4 battleships hit by torpedoes were out of action for 6 months or more. Japan had sunk 1 battleship by bombs alone. They'd achieved tactical surprise. They'd inflicted heavy casualties. They'd bought themselves time. But strategically, Japan had made catastrophic mistakes. First, they missed the aircraft carriers. Those 3 flat tops out on maneuvers that morning would become the core of America's Pacific counteroffensive. Within 6 months, at the Battle of Midway, those carriers would shatter Japanese naval power. Second, they ignored the fuel tanks. Millions of gallons of oil sat in storage at Pearl Harbor, untouched. Destroying those tanks would have crippled American operations for months, maybe a year. Third, they didn't hit the repair facilities, the machine shops, dry docks and repair yards that would soon be raising sunken battleships and fixing damaged ships. All survived intact. Fourth, and most important, they attacked battleships when battleships were already becoming obsolete. The future of naval warfare belonged to aircraft carriers. Japan had focused on the wrong target, but the biggest mistake wasn't tactical or operational, it was strategic. Japan gambled that America wouldn't have the will to fight a long, costly war. They were catastrophically wrong. The day after the attack, President Franklin D. Roosevelt delivered his famous Day of Infamy speech to Congress. Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. Congress declared war within hours. The attack that was supposed to demoralize America instead unified it. Isolationism evaporated overnight. Hundreds of thousands of men volunteered for military service. The vast industrial power of the United States, dormant throughout the Depression, roared to life. Factories that had built cars began building tanks. Shipyards that had stood idle started launching warships at a pace the world had never seen. America's economy, the largest on Earth, mobilized for total war. Japan wanted 6 months. They got 4 years of brutal conflict that would end with their cities in ruins and their empire destroyed. They wanted a negotiated peace. They got unconditional surrender. They thought they could knock out America's fighting spirit. Instead, they guaranteed America's total commitment to victory, no matter the cost. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who planned the Pearl Harbor attack, reportedly said, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." Whether he actually said those exact words is debated by historians, but the sentiment was accurate. Japan had awakened a giant, and that giant would not sleep again until Japan was defeated. Think about this for a moment. What if Japan had struck differently? What if they'd focused on the carriers, the fuel tanks, the repair yards? What if they'd launched a third wave to finish the job? Some historians argue it wouldn't have mattered. America's industrial might was simply too great, but others believe a more thorough attack could have delayed American counteroffensives by a year, maybe more. Could a better executed attack have changed the outcome? Or was Japan's defeat inevitable the moment they brought America into the war? Pearl Harbor stands as one of history's great ironies. A tactically successful attack that sealed the attacker's doom, a short-term victory that guaranteed long-term defeat. Japan achieved surprise, sank battleships, and bought time for their conquests. But they miscalculated everything that mattered. They underestimated American resolve. They overestimated American isolationism. They bet everything on a short war, when America was prepared to fight for as long as it took. The attack on December 7, 1941, didn't cripple the Pacific Fleet. It unleashed it. The battleships that sank in the shallow waters of Pearl Harbor were raised and repaired. The carriers that escaped became the instruments of Japan's destruction. The fires that burned that Sunday morning ignited something far more dangerous for Japan: America's absolute determination to win. History teaches us that sometimes, winning the battle means losing the war. Japan won at Pearl Harbor, but in winning they set in motion their own destruction. They gambled that one devastating blow would break American will. Instead, it forged American resolve into something unbreakable. The sleeping giant was awake, and it would not rest until victory was complete.